Welcome back. In this lab, we will reuse the application load balancer and the target group we created in the last video. But we will also create a launch template and configure an auto-scaling group to work with our application load balancer. We will do something similar to what we did in the last video, but we will be using the auto-scaling group to launch our instances in an automated way. And if you go through this complete lab, I promise you will find out what the Chaos Monkey is about. Let's get started. In our EC2 console, we can go to the left-hand side and scroll down till we see Launch Templates under Instances. We can click on it, and in the new window, we can select Create Launch Template. I will name my launch template ZTM-LT, and I will give it a description of for my ASG. We can then scroll down till we see Amazon Machine Image, and under there, I will select the Amazon Linux 2 AMI. And make sure you select the x86 based template and not the ARM version, because we will be launching regular EC2 instances. For the instance type, I will select the T2 micro instance type. For my key pair, I will select the EC2 Lab RSA key. Under Network Settings, I will select the security group to be my EC2 Lab security group because it has the necessary security configurations we need for our EC2 instances. For our storage volumes, I will leave it with its default configuration as it already has the free tier EBS volumes configured. Under Advanced Details, I will click on the drop-down and scroll all the way down till I see User Data. I will copy the user data script from the code I have provided in the course resource section of this course. This user data script is similar to the one we used in the last lab, where it is launching a web server and grabbing the internal IP address and creating an H1 tag. Now that we have configured everything we need in our launch template, we can go ahead and click on Create Launch Template. Once the launch template is created, we can click on View Launch Templates. And as you can see, the launch template gets a version number. This signifies the version we are on because if we make any changes to this launch template, we can create a version, and it helps us remember any changes that we may have done between the versions. So this will help us manage any changes we commit, the newer versions. And if we click on our launch template, we can see details about our launch template like the instance type, the key pair, and security groups we configured with this template. Now that we have created our launch template, what do you think we should do next? That's right, we need to configure our auto-scaling group. So if we go to our left-hand side and we scroll all the way to the bottom till we see auto-scaling groups under auto-scaling, and we click on it, in the new window we can click on Create an Auto-Scaling Group. I will name my auto-scaling group ZTM-ASG. And under Launch Template, I will select the launch template we just created. I want you to notice that if we click on Version, we can select the different versions of our launch template, but since we only have one version, I will leave it as the default. I also want to point out that once you select the version, it will show you the details of what the launch template will be configuring. This is also a good time to note that the launch template doesn't actually launch anything. The launch template is simply a configuration file that tells the auto-scaling group how to launch the EC2 instances. The auto-scaling group is responsible for actually launching the EC2 instances. Now, we can go ahead and click on Next. Under the VPC setting, we can leave it with the default VPC configuration. For our availability zones, I will select all of the options from the drop-down, and they should appear once we click on them. Under Instance Type Requirements, I want to note that if we wanted to override a particular setting from our launch template, we could do it here, but for this lab, we will just leave it as is and click on Next. For our load balancing option, I will select the Attach to an existing load balancer option. In the drop-down, we can select the target group we created in the last video, which is our ZTM-TG target group. Under Health Checks, we will click on the ELB option because I want my application load balancer to detect if any of my EC2 instances are healthy, which helps to replace the EC2 instances that are terminated or that become unhealthy. And then we can click on Next. I will configure my desired capacity to be 2, my minimum to be 1, and the maximum to be 3. This will basically tell our autoscaling group how many instances we want at all times. Under Scaling Policies, if we wanted to, we could select the Target Tracking Scaling option and configure our autoscaling group to scale our instances based on the metrics we define. For example, we could configure our scaling policy to scale based on the average CPU utilization. And we could define our target value to be 60%, but for this lab, we will leave it as none. And since we don't need scaling protection, I will click on Next. Here, we could click on Add Notification and then enable an SNS topic to send us an alert whenever our EC2 instances launch, terminate, fail to launch, or fail to terminate. But for this lab, we won't configure any of that, so we will just click on Next. Since we aren't adding any tags, I will click on Next. And finally, we can review our autoscaling group configuration and scroll all the way down to the bottom and click on Create Autoscaling Group. Now, if we go to our left-hand side and scroll all the way down and click on Load Balancer, we can again copy our load balancer DNS name and paste it in a new window. And as you can see, the H1 tag displays the internal IP address of the EC2 instance. If we click on Refresh, we should now see the other EC2 instance's internal IP address as well. Now, at the beginning of this lab, I promised you I would show you what the Chaos Monkey was about. Earlier in this course, I mentioned the idea of the Chaos Monkey, which is something Netflix implemented to test how available and resilient their infrastructure in AWS is. I want to do the same with our autoscaling group. If we go to our EC2 instance page, I will terminate one of these two EC2 instances. But before I do, what do you think will happen? Well, let's find out. I will click on our first EC2 instance, click on Instance State, then click on the Terminate Instance option, and then click on Terminate. To see what is happening in the background with our autoscaling group, we can go to our autoscaling group, click on the autoscaling group name, and then we can click on our Activity tab. Here, we can scroll down to the activity history and see what is happening. If you don't see it right away, you can click on the refresh icon. As you can see, the autoscaling group noticed that the EC2 instance was terminated or stopped, and then proceeded to launch a new EC2 instance. If we go back to our EC2 instance page and then click on the refresh icon, we should now see our terminated instance and the new fully launched instance. And if we go to the tab where we have the load balancer DNS name loaded, we can click on refresh. We should now see the new internal IP address of the new EC2 instance that popped up. Now we will quickly recap what we just did. We created an autoscaling group to automatically deploy our EC2 instance with a launch template and attach that autoscaling group to our load balancer to balance our traffic. We also had some fun and terminated an instance in production and saw how our auto-scaling group automatically replaced it. I hope you feel more comfortable with auto-scaling groups. I'll see you in the next video.